My name is Helen Bradley. I'm 59 years old, a widow, and I live in a modest two-bedroom house in Gresham, Oregon, a place where the rain feels like an old friend, and people still nod at each other on the sidewalk. For nearly 20 years, I've worked as the office manager at a small but steady law firm just off Main Street. It's not glamorous work, but it's honest. And after my husband John passed away when the kids were still in high school, it became the one constant I could lean on. Before we dive into her story, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Hearing from people around the world makes these stories even more powerful and reminds us how connected we all are. I have 2 children, Rachel and Ethan. They're good kids. At least, I believed they were. Last Tuesday, I came home after a long day at the office. My feet ached, my back was sore, and all I wanted was to sink into the couch with a cup of chamomile and maybe a rerun of something cheerful. I set my purse down, kicked off my shoes, and opened my laptop. There it was, an email from Rachel. No subject line, just her name. I smiled, thinking it might be a sweet note or an update about her wedding. We'd spoken just a few weeks earlier, going over her plans for the ceremony in Napa Valley. I'd already wired $30,000 to help cover the venue, photographer, and florist. She had always loved peonies, said they made her feel like spring was holding her hand. I clicked open the message, expecting warmth. Instead, I read, "Mom. Not dear Mom. Not even hi. Just Mom like a label." She wrote that after much discussion with her fiancé Brandon and his family, they had finalized the guest list, and after careful thought, they believed it was best if I didn't attend the ceremony in person. Her words were neat, cold, and wrapped in rationality. She said Brandon's mother wanted to keep things intimate. A curated experience, she called it. At the end, Rachel wrote, "You can watch through the Google Meet link we've created. Should be just like being there. LOL. Lol. I sat there, staring at the screen. My tea went untouched. My hands didn't shake, and I didn't cry. Something inside me shifted. Quietly, irrevocably. I replied with 4 words. "Sure. Enjoy your big day." No anger. No plea. Just a quiet withdrawal. And somehow, I knew those 4 words would echo more loudly than any screaming match ever could. I closed the laptop, finished my now cold tea, and went to bed. But it wasn't just another Tuesday. That was the day I stopped pretending my sacrifices meant something. You see, I've spent most of my adult life giving. Not just money, but time, energy, holidays, weekends, the little quiet things no one ever writes thank you cards for. When Rachel changed majors twice and needed more credits, I paid. When she moved to New York for a job that lasted 6 months, I covered her deposit and flights. When she broke down after another failed relationship, I flew out to hold her hand in a kitchen I'd never cooked in. When Ethan and his girlfriend wanted to buy their first home, I co-signed the mortgage and gave them $10,000 to help with the down payment. I never kept a ledger. That's what mothers do, right? But that email, those words made me feel like I was a transaction. Useful. Until I wasn't, like I had an expiration date I didn't know about. The next morning, I got up early and drove to work like usual. Gresham's spring air still held a bite, but I barely noticed. My mind kept circling the same question over and over. How did we get here? I passed the little cafe on the corner. Thought about stopping for a pastry, but didn't. I wasn't hungry. I wasn't anything. I just was. At the office, Mr. Lowell stopped by my desk. He's the kind of man who remembers how you take your coffee and whether or not you like biscotti. That day, he brought me a cup, placed it on my desk, and said gently, "You look like someone who's seen a ghost." I wanted to tell him. I really did. I wanted to say, my daughter disinvited me from her wedding. But instead, I smiled and said, "Just didn't sleep well." He didn't press. That small act of kindness, a warm cup, and silence nearly undid me. After all the noise in my mind, it reminded me I still existed. I still mattered, even if only quietly. Around lunch, my phone buzzed. Rachel's name lit up the screen like a spotlight. Voicemails, texts. "Mom, please answer. This isn't funny. We need to talk." I didn't answer. Not then. Maybe it was time to stop being the one who always answered. Maybe it was time to stop playing a role in someone else's story when they wouldn't even let me in the room. That afternoon, I made a decision that would change everything. I wouldn't raise my voice. I wouldn't beg. I would act. If you're still watching, comment one so I know you're still with me. After work, I didn't go home. Instead, I drove 2 blocks down to First Gresham Federal, my bank, since the kids were in grade school. The parking lot was quiet, the late afternoon sky painted with streaks of orange and lavender. I sat in the car for a minute longer than necessary, letting the engine idle. My fingers tapped absently on the steering wheel. I wasn't nervous, just still. Inside the bank, everything smelled faintly of printer ink and lemon floor polish. Dean Monroe, the branch manager, looked up from his desk the moment I stepped in. He was in his late 40s, always wore vests like it was still 1,998, and had helped me set up both Rachel and Ethan's college savings accounts. "Mrs. Bradley," he greeted warmly, standing to shake my hand. "What can I do for you today?" I sat across from him, folded my hands in my lap. "I need to cancel a wire transfer," I said, steady and calm. He blinked. "Which one?" "The payment to the Belle estate in Napa." Dean frowned slightly, typing something into his screen. "There may be a cancellation fee depending on the timing. Can I ask?" "The circumstances have changed," I interrupted, offering a tight but polite smile. He clicked a few more times. "You're in luck. It hasn't been processed yet. Just in time." He looked up, gently. "Are you sure, Mrs. Bradley? That's $50,000. I nodded once. "I'm sure." He paused, as if waiting for me to explain more. I didn't. With professional efficiency, he printed the cancellation forms. I signed where needed. In 10 minutes, it was done. I left the bank lighter. Not because $50,000 was saved, but because for the first time in a very long time, I'd chosen myself. When I got home, there were 9 missed calls from Rachel, 2 from Ethan, a voicemail with a sharp edge in her voice. "Mom, please don't do this." I turned off my phone. In the kitchen, I reached for a bottle of red wine I'd been saving since Thanksgiving. Rachel was supposed to come that weekend, but canceled last minute. "Work," she'd said. "Of course." I poured a glass, stepped out to the porch, and sat in the fading light. The neighbor's dog barked once. Sparrows flitted in the trees, chirping like nothing had changed. But everything had. And still no tears. Just memory. All the birthdays I spent alone because Rachel and Ethan were too busy. The holiday dinners I cooked just in case someone showed up. The gifts I wrapped, knowing full well they wouldn't be opened in front of me. The shoes I didn't buy. The vacation I postponed. The car I drove long past reasonable. I thought about Brandon's mother, this woman who barely knew Rachel, yet whose opinion seemed to carry more weight than mine, who, with a word, had the power to erase me from a day I'd helped make possible. And then I thought about Rachel's sign-off. Lol. Oh, as if watching your daughter get married through a screen was a joke. I didn't feel rage. I didn't feel shame. I felt clarity. For the first time, I stopped viewing myself through their eyes. I wasn't just Rachel's mom. I wasn't the backup plan, the last-minute rescuer, the invisible safety net. I was Helen, a woman, a widow who had held it together through more storms than her children even remembered. A woman who deserved more than transactional love. That night, around 9, the doorbell rang. I thought about ignoring it. Curiosity got the better of me. I opened the door to find Ethan tie loosened, sleeves rolled up, looking every bit like a man caught between his job and his guilt. His eyes darted to the porch light, then to the wine glass in my hand. "Mom," he began, stepping in before I could speak. "Why aren't you answering your phone?" "Rachel's freaking out." I didn't move. "Hello to you too." "Ems," he sighed, already pacing the entryway. "She says you're not coming to the wedding, that you're being difficult." I actually laughed. Difficult? For not attending a wedding I was uninvited from? He winced. "Andrew's parents are footing most of the bill, Mom. You know how traditional they are." "I already paid $30,000, I said, voice even. "And I was about to pay $50,000 more. That's not tradition, Ethan. That's business." He stopped short. Wait, you were sending another 50? I was, I said, sipping my wine. Not anymore. Ethan's face went pale. They're counting on that, Mom. The venue, the food, Not my problem anymore. His voice rose. Of course it's your problem. She's your daughter. And I'm her mother, I replied. A mother who was told to stay home and watch from a screen. He ran his hands through his hair, clearly agitated. You always make everything about yourself, he snapped. That did it. I set the wine down, stepped forward. Get out of my house. He froze. What? You heard me, Ethan. Get out. Mom. No, I said, soft but firm. I've given everything I had. I've bent and stretched and sacrificed until I forgot where I began. And now you all act like I'm selfish for wanting to be seen? Number? I'm done being the villain in a story I wrote with love. He stood there for a second longer. Then, slowly, he walked out. The door clicked shut behind him. I stood in the quiet. My heart was pounding. My fingers trembled just slightly. But I wasn't scared. I wasn't ashamed. I was free. The next morning, I woke to 43 missed calls. Text after text. Mom, we need to talk. This is childish. The venue called. The payment didn't go through. We're going to lose everything if we don't pay by tomorrow. Andrew's parents are furious. They say this proves they were right about you. At 3:24 a.m., Rachel sent. I don't understand why you're doing this to me. I smiled into my coffee. Of course, she didn't understand. Because my sacrifices had been so consistent, so automatic, she never stopped to ask where the stability came from. She never thought to trace the softness of her life back to the calloused hands that built it. But not this time. I wouldn't explain it to her. Because the lesson wouldn't be in my words. It would be in my silence. If you're still watching, comment 1 so I know you're still with me. Later that morning, while I was reviewing contract renewals at my desk, my personal email pinged with a subject line that read, "Please don't ruin my wedding." I didn't open it right away. I finished my coffee, typed a note for Mr. Lowell, and sent an inter-office memo about the copier maintenance. Ordinary things. Small routines. Like weights that kept me grounded. Then I clicked. Rachel had written a long message longer than the one where she disinvited me. This one was laced with guilt and panic. She wrote about how they'd lost the venue deposit and were scrambling to find another space. The caterer had pulled out. The florist had moved on to another client. Brandon's parents were deeply disappointed, and Rachel said she felt like everything was falling apart. I know you're upset about the live stream, she wrote. But this is extreme. If we don't pay the remaining balance by end of day Paris time, the entire weekend collapses. We can talk about letting you attend, but we need the funds first. That line hit like cold steel. We can talk about letting you attend. Letting me. As if my presence were something to be traded. A bargaining chip? A bonus prize if I played nicely. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even a reflection. It was a negotiation. As if I could be bought with the promise of a seat at a table I had already paid for. I didn't respond. I closed the laptop and turned back to my work. Around lunchtime, Mr. Lowell poked his head into my office. Lunch? He asked. That new Italian place opened up down the street. I almost said no. Habit told me to stay in, get caught up, keep my head down. But something had shifted in me. Maybe it was the silence of the past 2 days. Maybe it was just the slow, warm rise of dignity returning to my bones. I looked up and smiled. I'd love that. We sat outside under a faded green awning while birds squabbled in a nearby tree. Over pasta, he told me stories about his grandkids. 2 boys, one with a talent for chess, the other obsessed with bugs. He laughed easily, without trying to impress anyone. Halfway through the meal, he paused, studied me a moment. Forgive me, Helen, he said, but you seem lighter today. End of 2. I surprised myself. I told him everything. About the email, the wedding, the money, the choice to walk away. He didn't interrupt, didn't try to solve it, just listened. And when I finished, he reached across the table and gently tapped the back of my hand. Sometimes, he said, the hardest part of love is drawing a boundary with the people we've given the most to. I nodded. the truth of it sinking in like sun through fog. That evening, just as I was pulling into the driveway, I noticed a figure sitting on my front steps. At first, I thought it might be Rachel, but as I got closer, I recognized the soft frame, the familiar nervous hands. Lena? She stood up, brushing invisible lint off her coat. She looked older, more tired than the last time I saw her, but still had that same openness in her eyes. "Hi, Mrs. Bradley. I hope I'm not intruding. It's Helen now," I said gently, unlocking the door. "Would you like some tea?" Inside, the kettle hissed softly while Lena looked around the living room, as if expecting to see old posters or find her teenage self still curled up on the couch with Rachel. "She sent you?" I asked. Lena hesitated. "She doesn't know I came. Well, she's a mess." I didn't answer. "She knows she messed up," Lena continued. "She just doesn't know how to fix it." I placed 2 mugs on the counter. "Is that why you're here? To fix it for her?" "No," Lena said, honestly. "I'm here to ask, is there anything she can say or do to change your mind?" I paused. Would there be? Would any apology undo the feeling of being erased, of being reduced to a line on a spreadsheet? I looked at Lena. She was still young, still hopeful. "No?" I said softly. "There isn't." Lena's shoulders dropped. "Not even if she apologizes?" I handed her a mug. "Words are easy, Lena, especially when people are desperate. But people who love you? They don't wait until you cut them off to see you." She nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the steam rising from her tea. "I get it," she said. "Even if she doesn't." There was nothing more to say. She finished her tea in silence, then stood to leave. Before she walked out, she hugged me tightly, like a daughter might. I held her for just a second longer than expected. Then she was gone, and I finally closed the door on a version of myself I had long outgrown. If you're still watching, comment one so I know you're still with me. The wedding never happened. At least, not the one they planned. I didn't hear the details from Rachel. I didn't have to. Gresham is still the kind of town where word travels faster than the mail. A coworker mentioned that the Belle Seal estate quietly opened the date back up. Someone at the cafe said the caterer refused to reschedule, even after they begged. And Ethan, though we hadn't spoken since that night, left a voice message 3 days later. Just 4 words. They called it off. Oh, but it wasn't exactly called off. It was rearranged, resized, shrunk to fit the shape of reality. A few weeks later, a friend of mine ran into Brandon's aunt at the hardware store. She mentioned that Rachel and Brandon had done a backyard ceremony, modest, quick, nothing like what they dreamed. Just a few relatives. Brandon's parents. A folding table with cupcakes and lemonade. I wasn't invited. And this time, I didn't need to be. There was no part of me that longed to be in that backyard, no ache for a seat under a plastic tent. Not because I was bitter, but because I was finally learning to want something else. Something Keter. Something mine. It's strange what happens when you take your name off the giver list. The world doesn't end. The sky doesn't fall. The phone grows quieter. Yes, but so does your soul. In the weeks after the wedding that wasn't, I started a new ritual. Every Thursday evening, I'd walk 2 blocks to the community library where they held a small clay workshop. I almost didn't go the first time. I stood outside for 10 minutes, palms sweating, making excuses. Too old, too tired, too late. But the instructor, a woman in her 60s with a gray braid and kind eyes, opened the door herself. "You coming in, sweetheart?" she asked. So I did. And it was messy, joyfully messy. My hands didn't know what to do. The clay stuck under my nails, cracked in strange places. My first mug looked like a potato with a handle. But I laughed. I couldn't remember the last time I laughed without it being attached to someone else's happiness. By the 4th week, I knew everyone's names. Marlene, who wore vintage aprons and told stories about her exes. Joseph, who barely spoke but always brought oatmeal cookies. And there was a young girl named Aubrey, barely 20, who said I reminded her of her Nana. One night, Aubrey asked what I did before pottery. "I raised 2 kids," I said, without flinching. "And now?" I smiled. "I'm learning how to raise myself." She blinked. then nodded slowly, like she understood something she hadn't yet lived. Saturday mornings became mine too. I stopped checking my phone. I stopped scanning for names that once held weight. I walked to the farmer's market, bought strawberries even when they were overpriced, picked up flowers just because. At home, I opened the windows, played Billie Holiday, and let the wind move through the rooms like it belonged there. I started reading again. Whole novels, not just the endings. I drank my coffee while it was hot. I lit a candle before bed. Small things, insignificant to some, but not to me. One afternoon, while shaping a small clay bowl, Marlene looked over and said, "You're not like most women I meet." "How so?" I asked, amused. "You've got this stillness," she said. "Not empty, just steady, like someone who's done trying to prove she deserves a place at the table." I blinked, let the words sink in. For years I'd been begging silently, persistently to belong, to be invited, to be needed. I had mistaken usefulness for love. But sitting there, hands dusted with clay, surrounded by strangers who liked me for no reason at all, I realized I didn't need a table someone else built. I could make my own. And maybe it wouldn't be carved in mahogany or dressed with linen napkins. Maybe it would be a folding table in a church basement or a picnic bench under a tree. But it would be mine, built not from money or obligation, but from presence, from peace. It came on a Wednesday morning. The air smelled like fresh rain and coffee grounds, and I had just finished folding a warm pile of laundry. Soft towels, no one else's initials stitched into the corners, just mine. When I checked my email, there it was. From Rachel. Subject line, "I don't know where to start." I stared at it for a long moment. Not frozen, just still. Then I opened it. The message was long, nearly 5 paragraphs. There was no LOL this time. No jokes. No carefully worded distance. Just messiness. She said she regretted how she handled everything. That she hadn't meant to hurt me. That it wasn't personal, though she knew how hollow that sounded now. She explained how the pressure from Brandon's family, the budget, the image, the stress, it all felt too big. And somehow, in trying to make everything perfect, she'd pushed away the one person who had always shown up. She wrote, "I know this sounds like an excuse. Maybe it is. But I want you to know I'm sorry. I miss you." Then, in the final paragraph, came the justification. The turn. "You've always been strong, Mom. You always bounce back. I guess I assumed you'd understand. That you'd keep showing up like you always do." There it was. The truth wrapped in soft linen. She didn't think I'd disappear. She thought I'd absorb it, like I always had. I read it once, then again, slower. And then I archived it. Not to be cruel, not to punish, but because I didn't need anything more from it. Not a reply, not a resolution, not even closure. I had already closed that chapter, quietly, without fanfare. And sometimes, that's the most complete kind of ending. Later that afternoon, I returned to the community center. We were making coil pots that week, and mine looked like a wobbly beehive. Marlene brought cranberry muffins, and Joseph forgot his apron again. We laughed, traded stories, and no one asked me for anything except more clay. It felt like belonging. Not the kind you earn. The kind you settle into like a soft chair that finally fits your back. Aubrey slid into the seat beside me and nodded toward my half-formed bowl. "You know what I love about clay?" she said, brushing her thumb across the rim. "Even when you mess up, you can wet it, reshape it, start again." I smiled. "Unless it's already fired." She blinked, then grinned. "Okay, true. But before that, you've got a million chances." "Yeah," I said softly, pressing my palm into the soft edge. "That part's nice." When I got home that night, I made dinner for one. Baked salmon, roasted carrots, real dishes, cloth napkin. I sat at the table and lit a candle, not for ambiance, but for acknowledgement. For myself. Because I was here, not waiting for anyone to show up, not holding space for someone who might remember me, not hoping a phone would buzz or a doorbell would ring. Just me. And for the first time in decades, that was enough. There's a strange peace in letting go. Not out of anger, Not in bitterness, but in clarity. In knowing you don't need to hold what hurts just to feel connected. I didn't stop loving Rachel. That love lives in every peanut butter sandwich I made, every late night call I answered, every quiet prayer I whispered into her pillowcase as she slept. Love like that doesn't disappear, but I no longer needed to prove it, or beg for it to be seen. That was the shift. That was the freedom. If you're still watching, comment one so I know you're still with me. The invitation came folded inside a library newsletter. Nothing formal, just a handout left on the sign-in table of the pottery room. Calling all women 50 and up. Join us for tea, books, and stories at the East Gresham Reading Circle. Third Thursday of every month. Bring a friend or just yourself. I didn't think much of it at first. I tucked it into my coat pocket, meaning to throw it away later. But that night, while clearing my table, the flyer fluttered to the floor. I picked it up and read the line again. Bring a friend or just yourself. Just yourself. That part stayed with me, so I went. It was a cool Thursday in April when I first walked into the reading circle. A group of 12 or 13 women sat in a cozy side room of the library, surrounded by mismatched chairs, a chipped teapot, and a stack of gently used novels. No one asked what I did. No one asked if I had grandkids. They didn't even ask if I liked the book of the month. They just smiled and made space. And there I was, Helen Bradley, 59, never published, never known for her opinions, sitting in a room where my voice didn't need a reason to exist. We drank chamomile. We ate lemon scones. Someone made a joke about bifocals and we laughed until someone snorted. It wasn't polished, it wasn't planned. It was perfect. By the third meeting, I'd made friends. Not acquaintances. Friends. There was Joanne, who had retired from teaching and now volunteered at the animal shelter. And Ruth, a widow like me, who'd lost her husband during a morning walk and still couldn't look at sneakers without tearing up. And Elaine, sharp-tongued, silver-haired, always late, who carried stories in her purse like candy mints. We didn't compete. We didn't compare. We just showed up. One evening, Elaine leaned over and whispered, "You should host one of these sometime, Helen. You've got that warm lamp energy." I laughed. "I don't even have extra chairs." She waved her hand. "Chairs are overrated. Teapots and heartbeats. That's what matters." It planted a seed. Not a loud one. Just a quiet maybe. That weekend, while dusting the back room I rarely used, I looked around and saw it differently. The little sunroom where John used to read the paper. The space that had become a storage room for memories I didn't know what to do with. I cleared it out. Not all at once, but slowly. 1 box a day. Old curtain came down. A shelf went up. I placed a small round table near the window and covered it in a floral cloth I found at Goodwill for $5. And then I wrote a note. By hand. Just one copy. Tea at Helen's. Saturdays. 4 p.m. No agenda, no judgment. Just room to be. I brought it to the next reading circle and passed it to Joanne. No fanfare. That Saturday, 3 women came. By the next week, there were 6. I made honey cake from an old recipe Ruth brought in. Elaine brought the tea. We lit candles even when the sun was still up. We spoke softly, sometimes not at all. And sometimes when someone needed it, we cried without explanation. It wasn't a group. It wasn't a club. It was a corner. My corner. And it was enough. One evening, as we sat passing a bowl of blueberries, Joanne asked me, "Did you always want this? A space like this?" I thought for a moment. "No," I said honestly. "I think I just always wanted to be somewhere I didn't feel used up." She nodded. "Well, you're not." And just like that, I believed her. It came in the mail, folded neatly inside a plain white envelope with no return address. The handwriting on the front stopped me, cold, clean, simple block letters. Helen Bradley. Not Mom. Not Mrs. Bradley. Just my name. Full and clear. I stood in the doorway with my keys still dangling from one hand, grocery bag in the other. The wind had picked up a little, tossing early cherry blossom petals across the walkway like gentle confetti. I opened the envelope. Inside was a short note, handwritten on heavy cream paper. No hallmark flourish. No decorative font. Just this. "Hi, Mom. I'm not sure what to say that hasn't already been said, or hasn't been left unsaid for too long. If you're willing, I'd love to have lunch next week. Just you and me. No agenda. Just food. My treat. You pick the place. Ethan. No, sorry. No long explanation. But it didn't feel evasive. It felt honest. A little unsure. A little raw. Like he was trying. I set the note on the counter and stared at it while putting away groceries. I wasn't angry with Ethan. Not anymore. That left a long time ago, the day I realized how easily children learn to take what's always given without question. He hadn't written the cruel email. He hadn't made the final call, but he had defended it. He had looked at me that night in my own living room and accused me of making everything about myself when all I had done for decades was make everything about them. Still, this note, this quiet reaching out, it stirred something. Later that night, at our little Saturday tea, I read the note aloud to the women. Just the words. Nothing else. Joanne smiled softly. Sounds like an olive branch. Elaine scoffed. It's more like a crouton. But sometimes that's all you need to start a meal. We laughed. But I heard the truth behind it. Forgiveness doesn't always start with an apology. Sometimes it starts with presence. Showing up? I called Ethan the next day. He answered on the first ring. Hi, he said, breath caught like he'd been holding it for weeks. Hi, I replied. We agreed to meet Wednesday, noon, at a diner halfway between our neighborhoods. Nothing fancy. Booths with worn leather and pies displayed behind cloudy glass. I didn't dress up, but I wore earrings I hadn't touched in years. Tiny gold hoops John had given me for our 10th anniversary. Ethan was already there when I arrived. He stood as I approached, a little awkwardly, like a boy trying to remember how to act like a man. We sat. He ordered grilled cheese and soup. I got a Cobb salad I barely touched. For a while, we just talked about neutral things. Work, traffic, the weather. Then, somewhere between the second refill of coffee and the waitress asking if we wanted dessert, he said it. I didn't know how much I was relying on you to be the one who always stayed calm. I looked up, surprised. He went on, voice steady. Rachel, she's still angry. Says you humiliated her. But I've been thinking a lot about what you said. About being the villain in a story you wrote with love. I nodded slowly, letting him speak. I guess I never realized how much we asked of you. Not just money, but your silence. Your constant patience. He reached for his mug. I don't blame you for walking away. I think, he hesitated. I think you were right to. I didn't cry. I didn't reach across the table. I didn't rush to reassure him. I just said, thank you, because that's what it was. Not an apology, but a recognition. A door nudged open. And sometimes that's all you need. When we stood to leave, Ethan handed the waitress cash and turned back to me. I'd like to come to one of your tea things sometime, if that's okay. I smiled. We don't serve grilled cheese, but you're welcome. He laughed, really laughed. The first time in a long while. As I drove home, I felt something loosen in my chest. Not because things were fixed, but because for once, someone wasn't asking me to do the fixing. It was the first truly warm Saturday of the season. Sunlight spilled through the kitchen windows like honey. I had just pulled a blueberry loaf from the oven, the scent wrapping around the house like a soft shawl. The teapot was warming. The table was already set ceramic mugs, cloth napkins. A mason jar filled with wildflowers Aubrey had picked on her way over. By 4 o'clock, the women had begun to arrive. Elaine brought lemon curd and opinions, as always. Ruth brought a new poem folded into her purse. Joanne came late with a tin of shortbread and stories about a neighbor's cat. We settled in like we always did. No structure, no introductions, just the quiet, rhythmic dance of passing plates and pouring tea. Then the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone else. I wiped my hands and walked to the door, already assuming it was a package delivery or maybe Ethan, stopping by with an extra pie from the bakery. But when I opened the door, it wasn't either of those. It was Rachel. She stood there in jeans and a pale blue sweater, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. No makeup, no performative smile. Just Rachel. bare and blinking in the spring light. "Hi," she said softly. I didn't answer at first. I didn't move. She looked past me, into the house. Joanne's car is out front, and the lemon cake smell gave it away. "You still do tea, don't you?" My voice came out steadier than I expected. "Yes." She shifted her weight, held a hand at her side like she didn't know what to do with it. "Can I sit?" she asked. It was not "can we talk?" It was not "I'm sorry." It was not "I was wrong." Just, "Can I sit?" I opened the door wider. She followed me in, slow steps, like someone walking through a museum of memories they weren't sure they were allowed to touch. When we entered the sunroom, the women quieted. Elaine's brow lifted just slightly. Aubrey straightened her back. Joanne shot me a quick glance. "This is Rachel," I said, setting a sixth mug on the table. No explanation. No context. Rachel offered a small nod. "Hi, I'm Helen's daughter." The room accepted her like warm bread. No applause, no rejection, just quiet space. She sat beside Ruth and said nothing for a while, just sipped her tea, nibbled at a slice of the blueberry loaf. We didn't ask why she was there. She didn't offer. After half an hour, as plates emptied and conversation wandered toward childhood memories and forgotten birthdays, Rachel finally spoke. "I used to think strong women never said no," she said quietly. The room stilled. I thought they just kept giving, kept showing up. That's what I saw growing up. I guess I never wondered what it cost. She looked at me then, not crying, not performing, just looking. I'm still figuring it out. How to see things without needing them to be about me. No one responded. No one filled the silence. Because the silence was holy. Later, when the tea cooled and the guests began gathering their coats, Rachel stayed behind. She helped me stack the plates, rinsed out mugs without being asked. When the kitchen was quiet, she turned to me. "I don't expect anything, not right away. I missed your voice." I looked at her, my daughter, the girl I held through fevers and finals, the woman who once sent an email instead of a hug. And I said, "Then sit. Keep coming. Because love doesn't always come with grand speeches. Sometimes it just pulls up a chair." Rachel came back the next week. She didn't call ahead, didn't bring flowers, just showed up same time, same place with a peach cobbler in a foil dish and a notebook she never opened. "I wasn't sure what people liked," she said, holding the cobbler like it might break. "So I just guessed." I nodded and took it from her hands. Guessing is a start. We didn't hug. We didn't need to." Joanne tasted the cobbler and immediately requested the recipe, even though Rachel admitted it was off the back of a sugar bag. Elaine said it needed more cinnamon but ate 2 servings anyway. Rachel didn't talk much that evening, but she listened. Really listened. Not the kind of nodding that waits for its turn to speak. Just presence. Steady and attentive. She came the week after that too. And the next. Each time, a little more herself. Not the curated version from Instagram stories, not the exhausted daughter balancing image and control. Just Rachel. Hair tied back, sleeves rolled up, laughing when the lemon curd spilled, sighing when the cat next door tried to climb in through the window. She never brought up the wedding. She never tried to explain again. And somehow, that made it easier to let her stay. Forgiveness, I was learning, doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it looks like washing teacups together in silence. Sometimes it sounds like chairs dragging across the floor as someone chooses to sit next to you again. Ethan came by one Thursday afternoon, toolbox in hand. I'd mentioned during one of our walks that the back door had started sticking moisture and time conspiring against it. "I can fix it," he said casually, like it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing. He spent the better part of an hour sanding the edge, oiling the hinges, and tapping the latch into alignment. When he was done, the door swung open like it had missed being used. "You ever think," he asked, wiping his hands on a rag, "that sometimes all it takes to fix something is for someone to stop pretending it's fine?" I raised an eyebrow. "Are we still talking about the door?" He grinned. "Maybe." We had lemonade on the porch afterward. No talk of Rachel. No mention of what came before. Just the hum of bees in the lavender bushes and the slow settling of trust. I kept thinking about what Aubrey said at the pottery studio weeks ago. How clay can be reshaped as long as it hasn't been fired yet. I wondered if relationships were like that too. That if you catch them in time before bitterness hardens, you can still soften the edges, still form something new. One evening, after tea, Rachel lingered while the others left. She stood in the sunroom, looking at the wall where I'd hung a string of old postcards from the library's giveaway bin. She traced one with her finger, a painting of a cottage beside a lake. "You ever think of moving somewhere else?" she asked. I tilted my head. "Why?" "I don't know, just... You've always stayed. For us. For Dad. For everything." I smiled, slow and sure. I used to think leaving would be selfish. But now I think staying was how I loved you. And this, I gestured around, this is how I love me. Rachel looked at me with something like recognition and pride. "I'm glad you stayed," she said. "So am I." It was Ruth who asked first. We were clearing teacups on a Thursday evening when she handed me a folded paper with the library's stamp in the corner. "They're hosting a panel," she said. "Women rewriting their lives. Sounds like your kind of room." I smiled, more out of politeness than certainty. Me? A speaker? But that night, I read the flyer. It was simple. Just an evening gathering for women over 50. No big audience, no podium. Just folding chairs in a circle and a microphone passed by hand. The theme. What we've learned by living past the part we thought was the end. Something in that line tugged at me. So I said yes. The library's back room was strung with fairy lights and smelled faintly of paperbacks and peppermint. A dozen women gathered, some with notebooks, others with nervous smiles. No one wore suits. No one clutched business cards. It was a room full of stories, not resumes. When my name was called, I stood and walked to the center, not a stage, just a rug surrounded by chairs. My hands weren't shaking, but my breath did catch for a moment. And then I began. "My name is Helen Bradley," I said. "I'm 59, a mother, a widow, and, as of this year, someone who no longer asks to be seen." A few heads tilted, a couple of soft hums of recognition. I spent most of my life thinking love meant showing up no matter what, giving without pause, saying yes even when it hollowed me out. And for a long time, I didn't question it, because I thought that's what strength was. I paused. "But strength," I continued, "isn't in how much you give. It's in knowing when giving becomes erasing." The room was still. "I wasn't always brave," I said. "When my daughter told me I couldn't come to her wedding, that I could watch it through a screen, I didn't scream. I didn't argue. I just stopped." I looked down at my hands. Clay still lived under my fingernails from earlier that week. I canceled the check. I closed the door. And for the first time in decades, I poured a glass of wine and drank it for me, not because something was ending, but because something was beginning. A woman in the front row dabbed her eyes. I smiled gently. "I don't tell you this to shame anyone, or to glorify silence. I tell it because sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can do is stop explaining her worth." There was a quiet, slow round of applause, the kind that comes not from performance, but from recognition. When I sat back down, Ruth squeezed my hand. "You didn't tell your story," she whispered. "You owned it." After the panel, people mingled. Tea was poured. Stories were shared in pockets and corners. A young librarian approached me, barely 30, eyes soft behind thick glasses. "My mother lives in Ohio," she said. "She raised us by herself. Paid for college, helped with the down payment on my house, and last year I forgot her birthday." Her voice cracked. "Thank you for reminding me that she's still a person, not just a role." I hugged her, gently. Not as a mother, not as a speaker, just as Helen. When I left that night, the sky was streaked with pink and indigo. The parking lot was quiet. I drove home with the windows cracked just slightly, the air sweet and full of something I hadn't felt in years. Not victory, not revenge, but peace. The envelope was pale gray. Tucked beneath a flyer on my front porch, weighted by a smooth stone someone must have picked up from the garden path. No name. No return address. But the handwriting was familiar, stiff, deliberate, like someone afraid of saying too much. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No greeting. No flourish. Just this. I was at the library talk. I sat in the back. Didn't plan to stay. Didn't plan to feel much of anything, to be honest. But I did. I saw someone I never bothered to really see before. Not a mother. Not a checkbook. Not a symbol of tension. Just a woman. Thank you for telling your story. It made my mother cry. That's rare. Brandon. No signature. Just his first name. I sat down on the porch steps, the paper trembling slightly in my hand, not from nerves, but from the wind picking up, brushing past my shoulder like it wanted to read over it too. Brandon. The man who once stood silently behind Rachel's choices, nodding in agreement when I was turned into a transaction. The man whose mother had labeled me too much and not quite fitting, before ever hearing my laugh or tasting my cooking. He had been a shadow in this whole story, not the villain, not the architect, but present enough to reinforce the script Rachel followed. And now this. No defense. No revisionist history. Just a thank you. I didn't cry, but I did let the stillness settle around me like an old quilt. Because something had shifted. He had seen me. Not in the way I had once begged to be seen through family roles, through sacrifice, through trying to be useful, but as a person. Whole. Separate. Clear. That night, at tea, I shared the letter with the women. Elaine let out a low whistle. Well, I'll be. That boy might have a brain after all. Joanne chuckled. A late bloomer, maybe. But we'll take it. Ruth didn't say anything right away. She just reached over, touched my arm, and whispered, You broke a chain. And maybe that's exactly what it was. Not a rupture. Not a victory. Just the undoing of a pattern. The loosening of a grip. That week, something in the air around Rachel shifted, too. She started arriving early to tea. Helped with dishes without being asked. Saturday longer after everyone else had gone. Sometimes just staring out the window as if searching for a version of her childhood she'd left behind. One evening, as we sat folding napkins, she asked, Did you ever feel invisible growing up? The question caught me off guard. No, I said. Not invisible. Just expected. She nodded. I think I did that to you. I think I just expected you to always be there. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Some truths land better when they aren't echoed aloud. She added quietly, I never asked what you wanted. I'm not even sure I knew you had wants. This time, I looked at her. I did, I said. I still do. Rachel held my gaze. I want to learn them. If you'll let me. There it was. Not a grand apology, but something more important. Curiosity. The willingness to see me as someone other than the woman who packed her school lunches and paid her first rent. Someone with edges. With stories. With needs. I didn't answer right away, but I smiled, and I left the porch light on for her the following Saturday. It started with a text. Just 4 words. Want to go Saturday? New context. New emojis. Just a question. I stared at it a moment before typing back. Where? Her reply came quickly. Farmer's market? 9 a.m.? He hesitated. It wasn't that I didn't want to go. It was that for so long, Rachel's invitations had strings attached, holidays with expectations, dinners with agendas. I wasn't sure if this was one of those, or something new. But when I showed up at the corner of Main and Park that Saturday morning, I saw her standing near the coffee cart, hair tucked under a wide-brimmed hat, holding 2 paper cups. She handed one to me without saying a word. Hazelnut and oat milk, right? He blinked. You remembered. She shrugged. I've always remembered. I just didn't ask often enough. We walked side by side into the rows of white tents. The air was thick with the scent of peaches, herbs, fresh bread. Laughter floated through the trees like bubbles. Children tugged at their parents' hands, begging for cinnamon rolls or sunflower stems. Rachel pointed to a table stacked with strawberries. You used to freeze them for smoothies, she said. Even when we were broke. I laughed. Especially when we were broke. It was the only fruit I could afford in bulk. She bought 2 baskets, insisted on paying. At the cheese stall, she sampled a slice of soft brie and wrinkled her nose. Still can't do anything that smells like socks. Your loss, I teased, selecting a wedge for myself. We moved slowly, unhurried, like people who had nowhere else to be. We admired jars of local honey, touched handmade soaps, watched a little girl twirl in a hand-stitched dress. I used to dream about this, Rachel said suddenly. You and me, doing regular things, like other moms and daughters. I looked at her, surprised. You never said. She shrugged. I thought it was selfish. You were always working, or tired, or disappearing into the kitchen to make life possible. I thought if I asked for more, I'd be taking too much. I stopped in front of a stand selling lavender bundles, turned to face her. Rachel, you were never too much, but I was too silent. I thought if I just kept giving, you'd understand I was loving you. I never realized I was teaching you how to expect me, without ever asking who I was. She nodded, eyes softening. I'm trying, Mom. I can see that. We sat on a bench near the park fountain, our bags full of things that smelled like summer. Rachel pulled a cherry from her bag, popped it into her mouth, and chewed slowly. Do you ever wish things had gone differently? She asked. I took a sip of my coffee, thought for a moment. No, I said. I wish we had seen each other sooner. But if we had, we might not have understood what it cost to miss it. She smiled, small and sincere. I'm glad you didn't come to the wedding. That surprised me. Why? Because if you had, she said, I never would have had to reckon with what I did. I never would have had to grow up. I reached over and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. And I never would have found myself either, I said. For a long moment we just sat there. 2 women. Not mother and daughter, not givers and takers. Just Helen and Rachel. Under the sun, near the strawberries. No stage, no conditions. Just this. Presence. And in that moment, it was enough. It arrived in a brown paper bag with my name written in black ink. Rachel handed it to me after tea one evening. No grand gesture, no speech. Just, I saw this at the bookstore and thought of you. Inside was a notebook. Soft leather cover, creamy pages, unlined, and a small note tucked in the front. For your stories, not ours, yours. I stared at those 4 lines longer than I should have. I had forgotten, somewhere along the way, that I even had stories of my own. I used to write, not novels, nothing big, but little things. Reflections, lists of smells I loved, conversations overheard in diners, letters I never sent. And then came diapers, college applications, emergency calls at midnight, mortgages, silent meals, the rhythm of care so full it drowned out my own voice. But now there was this empty book. And permission. That night, after the house was quiet and the dishes were stacked to dry, I lit a candle in the sunroom and opened the notebook. Page 1. No title, just the beginning. I was not always tired. Once, I danced barefoot in the kitchen to Patsy Cline and burned toast on purpose just to watch it curl. Once, I read poetry to myself in the mirror and laughed when I cried. Once, I was a woman first before I was anything else. The pen didn't stop after that. I wrote for 30 minutes, then an hour. The clock ticked past midnight, but I didn't feel the weight of time, only the lightness of return. Each day after that, I wrote a little more. Sometimes just a sentence. Grief is like a second skin tight, but invisible. Sometimes a memory. Ethan's first word was dog, even though we didn't have one. Sometimes just silence on the page, which still counted. The notebook became my ritual. I carried it in my bag, set it beside the teapot during our Saturdays, scribbled while waiting in line at the post office or on the bench outside the pharmacy. It wasn't about writing something important. It was about remembering that I was still here, still curious, still layered, still becoming. Rachel noticed. She never asked to read it, but she'd glance at it, sometimes smile when she saw the frayed ribbon I used as a bookmark. One afternoon, she came early to help set up for tea. As we arranged chairs in the sunroom, she asked, "Have you written about me yet?" I paused. "Not directly," she laughed. "Smart move. But I've written around you," I added. "And about me. And how I got lost trying to hold everyone else together." Rachel nodded, then picked up a stack of napkins. "I want to read it someday," she said. "But only if you want me to." I didn't answer right away, because maybe I wasn't writing it for her. Maybe I was writing it for the woman I used to be, or the one I'm still learning to become. That weekend, at the pottery class, I showed the notebook to Marlene. She ran her hand along the cover and grinned. "You should teach a writing circle." I scoffed. "What would I teach?" She looked up. "That you're never too old to start telling the truth, especially your own." The phrase lingered. All the way home. Later that night, I opened to a fresh page and wrote, "The scariest part of writing is not what others will think. It's what you will finally admit to yourself once the words are out." Then I closed the book and felt lighter. It started with a question, murmured between spoonfuls of lemon pudding and steam rising from chipped teacups. Marlene had just finished telling us about the time she walked out of a department store job in 1983 after a manager touched her lower back one too many times. We'd laughed, applauded, even whistled. But then, in the quiet that followed, Ruth looked around the table and asked, "Why didn't we ever write these things down?" No one answered right away. Not because we didn't want to, but because for so long, we didn't think anyone would care to read them. That night, after everyone left, I sat alone in the sunroom and opened my notebook. On a blank page, I wrote in small, deliberate print, "Her story, a space to write, to speak, or to simply be." I stared at those words for a long time, then added one more line, "Fridays at 6. Bring a pen or don't. Come as you are." I made 10 copies on the library printer and handed them out at the next Saturday tea. Most nodded politely. Elaine squinted and said, "What are we supposed to do, exactly?" "Whatever you need," I said. "Write, talk, sit in silence. There are no rules." She gave a non-committal shrug. But that Friday, she was the first to show up. She brought a lemon tart and a dog-eared notebook that looked older than Rachel. By 6:15, 4 women had gathered in my sunroom. We didn't light candles or open with a speech. I poured tea. Elaine passed out napkins. We sat. For a while, no one spoke. Then Gloria, a retired social worker, cleared her throat and said, "Can I read something I wrote in 1976? We nodded. It was a letter to her younger self. It wasn't perfect. Her hands trembled a little. She had to stop twice to wipe her eyes. But when she finished, we were all crying. That was the beginning. Each week, more women came. Some brought journals. Others brought poems, letters, fragments of conversations. Some came only to listen, their silence thick with memory. We called it her story, not mine, not yours, but ours. A place where nothing had to be polished, where no one needed to raise their hand to speak, where tears didn't need permission. Danielle, a young mother who came in through Elaine's hairdresser, read 3 sentences about how angry she felt after giving birth. Then she apologized 5 times before we gently told her she didn't have to. A woman named Linda admitted she hadn't said her husband's name out loud in 7 years. "Not since the cancer," she whispered. "Not since people stopped asking." "Here," we asked. Not to fix, just to witness. That was the real magic. The witnessing. The simple, profound act of being seen in the middle of your becoming, not just after the happy ending, but in the messy, aching, still waking middle. Rachel came once. She didn't say much, just sat in the corner with her tea and listened, her eyes scanning every speaker like she was searching for a part of herself in their words. Afterward, she lingered while the others left. "That was heavier than I expected," she said, setting her mug in the sink. "But also lighter. I don't know how to explain it." "You don't have to," I said. "Just come back when you're ready." She nodded. "Maybe next week." She did come back. And the next week after that. She didn't read aloud, but one Friday she handed me a folded slip of paper. On it she had written, "I thought strength meant carrying things silently, but maybe it also means learning how to lay them down." I added it to the pile of stories others had left behind in drawers, under mugs, inside books on my shelf. Little truths tucked into corners, waiting to be remembered. I started keeping a special notebook just for these moments. Not a journal, a collection of her stories. Stories of girls who grew up quiet, of women who left when they were told to stay, of grief that lasted longer than anyone said it would, of forgiveness that didn't come with apologies, of beginnings that came years after what felt like endings. And maybe, most of all, of the ways we kept showing up not for someone else, but for ourselves. Rachel said to me one night, "You created something beautiful here." I shook my head. No, we did. Then I looked around the sunroom at the string lights draped along the windows, the mismatched pillows, the stack of donated notebooks on the side table. I realized I had built something I never thought I'd have. A place where no one had to earn their seat. A place where silence could be holy, and brokenness didn't need a bow. A place to begin again. And in every voice that trembled across the room, I heard the same quiet truth rising again and again. We were never too late. We were only just getting started. Some mornings now, I rise before the sun and sit quietly by the window with a cup of tea. Not to plan, not to fix, just to be, just to listen. The candle on the sill flickers softly, the same one I lit on the night Rachel walked back into my sunroom without needing permission. It's become a kind of lighthouse now, not for lost ships, but for steady hearts. A reminder that we don't always need a map sometimes, we just need to keep a light on. There's no urgency in my life these days. No lists taped to the fridge. No guilt looming over my shoulders. No more proving I'm still worth something just because I gave everything. Because now I know I am. Not because I was useful, but because I am whole. Ethan visits often. Sometimes he brings his fiancée, and sometimes he just brings muffins and news about work. He never rushes our conversations anymore. We sit on the porch and talk about nothing until it becomes something. Rachel comes too. She doesn't come to make up for what happened. She comes because she wants to, because somewhere in the spaces between what we said and what we chose not to say, we found a place to start again. Last week, she came early to her story. She brought a notebook this time. "I don't know if I'm ready to share," she whispered, "but I think I'm ready to write." I smiled. That's more than enough. Her story has grown in ways I never expected. Some Fridays we have 6 women, some nights 20. Sometimes someone shares something so raw the whole room sits in silence for a full minute before anyone exhales. Sometimes all we do is laugh about the little things: burnt toast, lost earrings, conversations we wish we had handled differently. We've created something here. Not a club, not a class, a circle, a holding space. A place where you can show up with nothing but your breath and still be enough. One night, after everyone had gone, Rachel stayed behind and said, "You know, if someone had told me 5 years ago that you'd become the kind of woman who hosts something like this, I would have laughed." "And now?" I asked. She looked at me for a long second, her voice soft. "Now I want to be like you." I didn't cry. I didn't need to, because that was never the goal, to change her mind or rewrite the past. It was simply to live in the present deeply enough that others might want to join me there. Forgiveness came not as an event, but a process. It arrived in small gestures: a door held open, a hand wrapped around a teacup, a quiet seat pulled up beside mine. And in letting go of needing an apology to move forward, I gave myself the one gift I'd long denied: freedom. There's a quote I read aloud sometimes during her story, especially when someone says, "But isn't it too late?" I tell them no. Then I say, "It's never too late to be what you might have been." George Eliot. And I believe it now more than ever. Because I've seen it. Not just in me, but in them. In Ruth, who started painting again at 73. In Danielle, who applied to nursing school with 2 toddlers at home. In Gloria, who finally called her estranged sister after 15 years. In Rachel, who wrote a poem last week that began, "She used to wait by the door for everyone else. Now she keeps the key." Ugh. And in every woman who dares to show up and speak from the place she thought no one cared to hear from. That's her story. And it's mine too. If you've been watching this and wondering whether it's too late to start again, to forgive, To become who you were always meant to be, let me tell you something from my own heart, poured out one Friday evening at a time. It's not too late. It's just time. So if this story touched something in you, I hope you'll stay a while. Sit with it. Maybe even write something down. Share it with a friend. Or tell me in the comments what part of her story stayed with you the most. I'd love to hear yours. And just in case no one's told you lately, you matter. You're not behind. And you still have a light to shine. We'll be here. Tea's on at 6.